I counted the register, and she briefed me on her shift as to what had happened as per usual. As she was leaving, my friend, we will call him Andrew, pulled up. He worked second shift maintenance at this hotel, and the other two hotels our company owned. He would regularly stop by after work and go grab us some food, and we would play World of Warcraft on our laptops after eating for a while, since business was so slow. He was just getting my money order for food and getting ready to leave. I was excited telling him about how much fun I had at the wrestling show and was showing him my Terry Funk t-shirt I was so proud of. I was just walking into the back office to put the shirt up when I heard the doorbell indicating a customer had entered. It is true what they say, is not for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. I turned around when I heard someone say something loudly, but I still couldn't make out what they had said. I had just reached the doorway when I saw Andrew just fall in front of me. The next thing I know, a guy walks around the corner and punches me in the head with a short steel pipe in his hand. It staggered me, and I went to one knee. The next thing I know, he hits me in the head with the pipe. Then I heard the other guy who I hadn't noticed to this moment say he got away and got a cop. They left out the door. I was finally able to get to my feet. I tried to call the police from the phone in the back office, but it was having issues. I slammed it in frustration. I was hurting and scared. I was really freaking out. I realized that they could come back, so I ran and locked the door. I didn't know where Andrew had gone, and that worried me. I called 911 about this time. Blood had started pouring down my head. I told the operator I had been attacked and needed an officer and ambulance. I then called the other hotel we ran to, let the night manager named Travis, who was over all three properties, what had happened. He thought I was messing with him at first, because when we got bored, we would prank each other. I finally convinced him I was not joking. He was going to lock up and come down. The cops and ambulance pulled up, and I opened the door. It was at this time I found out that after they sucker punched him and knocked him down, Andrew was able to amazingly jump over the desk and escape just as a cop was driving by, and he ran to flag down for help. I ended up in the hospital ER, where I had to have 10 staples in my scalp, and they gave me morphine for pain. I had no way to get home after being treated, but the doctor and nurses took pity on me and paid for a cab. My plan was to go back to work because this was December and Christmas was coming. I had 3 kids and needed all the hours could get. When I got back to the hotel, the it guy Ted was there with his wife Barbara, who also worked at the front desk. She was shocked to see me. She thought I would still be in the hospital. I thought I had only been hit in the head once after being punched. The video that Ted was pulling for the police showed a different story. After I went to one knee, the guy had hit me not just one time, but 10 total times. I kept trying to grab the pipe and get up for some reason. I do not remember that. I guess I was out on my feet. He kept punching me and hitting me with the pipe, till his friend tells him Andrew got away and then got the cops. The two of them then run out. I was given a room at the other hotel my company owned because they did not want me to go back to work, and Ted and Barbara gave me a lift there, as I was in no condition to drive due to the morphine. They also gave me a paid week off to heal. They switched me over to the other hotel on the night shift for a month just in case they were after me in particular. We never found out why they chose to attack me. The police thought it might be a failed strong-arm robbery due to Andrew getting away and me not just going down. It shook me up though, not knowing. Even though I was at our other hotel when I came back to work the night shift, I was still nervous. Every time the door chimed, I tensed up. I couldn't afford to quit though, as I said I had 3 kids I was supporting. They never caught the guys as far as I know. A detective stopped by about 2 months later when I was working second. He showed me several mugshots and asked me if any of them looked familiar. I never got a great look at them, as it all happened so fast. I had seen the video, which wasn't the best quality. Even so, two of them looked very familiar. I pointed them out and he asked me how sure I was. I told him honestly, like 85%. He then yelled and asked me if I wanted someone to go to jail for attempted murder on 85%. I was stunned into silence. I was the victim. I was attacked for no reason, and he was yelling at me like it was my fault. I was too busy being attacked to get a good look at them. I no longer work at a hotel and night shift, and I am glad because it is just too dangerous in this area. My name is Jordan Reyes, and in November 2019, I was working the night shift at Mercy Hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'd been there for almost a year, and while I liked the actual nursing part of my job, I dreaded dealing with our nursing supervisor. He was the type of boss who would bark orders down the hallway for everyone to hear, and he had this zero-tolerance policy on lateness. If you clocked in even 1 minute past your start time, you'd better brace yourself for a lecture, or worse. That month felt colder than usual. The night in question was November 12th, 2019. I remember checking the weather app that afternoon before leaving my apartment. It was already dark outside by the time I got into my car around 10 p.m. My shift started at 11, but I always gave myself at least a 30-minute cushion just in case traffic was bad or I ran into any other hiccups. Hiccups came faster than I expected. About 10 minutes into my drive, I felt my steering wheel tug to one side. I pulled over and saw that my front right tire was completely flat, a jagged piece of metal sticking out of the rubber. Thankfully, there was a small, round-the-clock auto shop off Broad Street. The mechanic there patched the tire quickly, but I still lost precious minutes. By the time I reached the hospital parking lot, it was 10:55 p.m. I locked my car in a hurry and sprinted toward Building 7. This particular building was older. Its lobby light flickered every so often, and the only way up at night was an ancient elevator that looked straight out of the 70s. Nobody else was around. The hallway felt deserted, which was normal at that hour. Most staff were already on their floors, and visiting hours had ended hours ago. I hopped in and pressed the button for the 7th floor. The elevator panel didn't light up right away, which nearly made me panic. I pressed it a few more times, muttering something like, "Come on, not tonight." Eventually it kicked into gear, and I felt the floor lurch under my feet as it began to climb. I reached my department with a minute or two to spare. The nursing supervisor was outside the break room, arms crossed, eyes narrowed as if he'd been waiting for me just to point out I was this close to being late. He didn't say much except a grumble, "Start your shift." Luckily, that night went by uneventfully. I almost forgot about the entire ordeal. Almost. The next morning, I woke up feeling terrible. My throat hurt, and I had a pounding headache. I called the supervisor to say I probably couldn't make it in, but he refused, insisting they were already short-staffed. He said I could take off the following day instead, and I, stupidly, agreed, rather than argue with him. I was exhausted, so I ended up leaving my place later than usual. That was my second mistake of the week. I got stuck behind a slow-moving truck near City Hall, and then hit every red light imaginable. By the time I parked at Mercy's lot, it was already 11:05 p.m. I grabbed my bag and ran through the main doors, feeling that knot in my stomach because I knew the supervisor would blow a fuse. My phone buzzed repeatedly, probably him calling to yell at me. I didn't stop to pick it up. When I got into that old elevator, I was so flustered that I jabbed at the buttons without thinking. I must have hit more than one floor. The doors closed and the elevator went up. I glanced at the floor indicator. It read 10, which made no sense. We almost never go to the 10th floor. It's mostly administrative offices, and they're locked at night. The doors slid open, revealing a hallway lit only by a couple of emergency lights. I couldn't see any movement at all, and for a second, I wondered if I should step out and see if something was wrong. But before I decided, the elevator doors slid shut again on their own. The elevator started moving, but instead of going down to 7, it descended all the way to the basement. I'm positive I never pressed the basement button. I don't even think about that floor, to be honest. The doors opened and a weak yellow light flickered inside the corridor. At first, I thought the hallway was empty. Then I noticed a man standing in the corner, wearing what looked like a hospital gown. His back was to me, and he wasn't moving or making any sound. My first instinct was not to step out. There was something about the way he stood, unmoving, that felt off. I quickly hit the 7th floor button. Right as the doors began to close, I saw him start to turn his head, but I never saw his face. The doors shut, and I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. By the time the elevator reached my floor, I was on edge. I rushed out, breathing heavily. The nursing supervisor, instead of berating me, actually looked concerned. I guess I was pale or sweating. I told him what I saw, and his attitude shifted completely. For once, he didn't scold me. He told me to calm down, and that maybe some confused patient had ended up in the basement. It wasn't common, but it wasn't impossible either. He grabbed another staff member, an orderly named Marcus, and we all rode the elevator down together. We reached the basement, the same flickering light overhead, but there was no one in sight. We even checked the small utility room on the left, the closet filled with spare gurneys, and the supply cage that was normally locked. Nothing. If there had been a patient there, he was gone. The supervisor looked at me for a moment, then just said, "It's fine, let's go back." In the following days, I asked around about any patient who might have been wandering the hospital, but no one had heard of anyone going missing. None of the usual checks turned up anything. The security cameras in Building 7 were laughably outdated, and apparently they weren't even positioned to capture the basement corridor clearly. That was the last straw for me. I'd already been stressed from the constant threat of my supervisors yelling, the late shifts, and the hospital's dire atmosphere. Seeing something so strange and then having it vanish without explanation really got under my skin. A few weeks later, I put in my notice. By January 2020, I was gone, starting a new position as a nursing supervisor at a smaller hospital in the suburbs. Sometimes, though, I still think about that night. I've run through every rational explanation. Maybe he was a patient who found a way out, or maybe it was some hospital intruder wearing scrubs. But the fact that he turned his head just as the doors closed, almost like he knew I was watching, makes me uneasy to this day. I've never been back to Mercy Hospital. This was years ago, maybe back in 2018 or even earlier than that. I was only a teenager when this happened. My best friend and I used to hang out daily. We were practically sisters at this point. I was already into all the creepypasta stuff and horror movies, and even experienced some paranormal things in the past as a child. We were at her house that day. She was living in a townhouse with her family, so the layout first floor was the living room, dining room, and kitchen. And upstairs were 2 bedrooms and a shared bathroom. The rooms were across the hall from each other. Her mother was in one room, and they turned part of the living room into her grandma's room, since she was too old to climb stairs. Her dad wasn't in the picture, and I think out of the 10 years we've been friends, I only met him once. He's a junkie, and wasn't a good man. Definitely wasn't a good father to her. Anyway, we were at her house that night, and we're planning on spending the night. We didn't have anything big planned since we were both minors. The thing we do most is go to Walmart and just chill out. This was when Walmart was 24 hours. For some reason, I got very tired out of nowhere. I was halfway leaning on her bed, and my knees were on the floor supporting me. We were both just on our phones when I quite literally passed out, still in that position. I'm normally a light sleeper, so any noise will wake me up. It was like my eyes stayed shut, but I could hear my friend's phone volume and even hear her get up off the bed and go to her mother's room to speak to her. I remember before passing out, the room light was on. It was a ceiling fan light, and she rarely had the fan on, so she would use the light switch instead of turning on off the light by the actual strings. When the room was finally silent, I drifted off into deep sleep. I remember having basically a nightmare. The dream was about the current house we were in, and her father was living here too. In all the rooms were security cameras placed in hidden spots. Like the residents didn't know they were there, and her father would have to footage on his tablet phone. In the dream, I was in my friend's room sitting on her bed, the same side of the bed I'm currently passed out on, and I see a tablet next to me. I pick it up and see multiple angles of the hidden areas. It was like her dad accidentally left it there. The security footage was of a family that was not my friends living in the house. And every time the people would be shown on the cameras, they were always disoriented. Their faces were creepy looking, and you couldn't even make out what they looked like. At some point, I remembered seeing a lady turn her head towards the camera, and she had maggots coming out of every hole on her face, her mouth, eyes, nose, and ears. Her face had pus dripping, and her face was basically suckened in due to the maggots eating it away. It was super disturbing. After freaking out in my dream, my friend enters back into the room, and suddenly her room light goes out. We tried to turn it back on from the switch, but it wouldn't work. We even tried the strings on the ceiling fan, but they still didn't work. I grabbed my phone trying to turn on the phone flashlight, but my fingers wouldn't press the button. I don't remember how the dream ended, but I remember waking up in the same position that I fell asleep in. My knees at the point are sore, and I don't even know how I managed to stay in that position. Also, when I woke up, her room lights were off, and it was pitch black in her room. It was also dark outside, but when I passed out, I remember it to be still light out. I woke up and climbed onto the bed trying to regain my leg strength. I let out a sigh, and my friend was on her phone like everything was normal. She turned her phone towards me, so the light was shining my way. I told her in a calm voice that I just had the worst dream ever about this house and her dad, and she got anxious, wanting me to tell her about it. I tell her first she needs to turn the light on because I'm not continuing until it's on. Still shaken up and some reason glued to her bed, she gets up and goes to the light switch across the room. Before she even makes it there, I say out loud, "If your light doesn't turn on, I'm leaving and going back home." She just looked at me weirdly and flicked on the light switch. The dim light turned on, but I still held my breath. She looked at me concerned and started walking back to the bed while I gathered the courage to tell her. As she's walking, the room light suddenly goes out and she gasps. At this point, I'm still holding my breath and I'm silent. My eyes widened as my eyes were trying to adjust to the darkness. I feel my heart start to race, and my friend tries the light switch again. It's not turning on. She goes to the strings on the ceiling fan and pulls it, but still nothing. She then twists the light bulb and the light comes back on, just a loose bulb. She says, trying not to scare me even more. I finally told her what happened, and she could tell I was scared because I was shaking. It was eerily cold in her room all of a sudden, but it was in the middle of southern summer, so it was hot and humid. She said she knew something was wrong while I was asleep because my breathing suddenly became loud and heavy. She just thought I was about to start snoring, but then said I started breathing fast like I was out of breath. We both get creeped out, and I say I need to leave her house because I just don't feel comfortable anymore. She suggested we just go to Walmart and get fresh air because she is now freaked out too. I agree, and we go. I told her I didn't want to spend the night anymore, but she convinced me to stay because she was scared too. I never had anything happen like that in her house again, and soon moved past it. But it still gives me chills how the light in my dream and in real life went out exactly the same. She's been moved out of that house, but her family still stays there. It was a toxic environment for her there, and it was most likely just the toxicity that made me have that dream. Still though, gives me the chills every now and then.